Here's a hot take. I don't think you should modify your motorcycle. Beginner riders tend to get obsessed with modifying their bikes. They want full exhaust systems, ECU flashes, tail tidies, new tires, levers, quick turn throttles, and even winglets if we're talking about the truly deranged. But as a concerned dad or uncle in your life on the internet here, I want to make the case for you today on why you should probably leave your motorcycle's sweet giblets alone. Let me start with a personal anecdote. When I was a teenager, I put a fart can on my car. Yes, I was one of those teenagers, and you might say, well, of course you are. Look at you, Yam. Of course you did such an awful thing. But when I was a kid, I put a Cork Sport exhaust on my Mazda 3, and I remember my dad telling me something that stuck with me all the way until today. He said, you know, the engineers know a little bit more about that than you do, right? And I thought he was stupid because I wanted to make my car super loud and cool. And I've kind of come around on this idea that the engineers usually know more than you do when it comes to modifying your motorcycle. Now, of course, there are emissions regulations that engineers have to comply with, which is why your motorcycle is more quiet than you might want it to be, but it's also contributing to the factors of having better fuel efficiency, better range, and overall a more livable and relaxed riding experience. And maybe it's just because I'm getting up there in age, but I kind of prefer a motorcycle that's a little bit more relaxed and quiet nowadays than some super loud exhaust. The other thing you might not think about is that these engineers designed your motorcycle to be as safe as possible. Let me tell you a little bit why modifying your bike might actually make it unsafe. When the designers and engineers of your motorcycle put it together at the factory alongside all the assembly workers, they triple check all of the bolts for their torque settings, they check to make sure everything has a proper amount of slack, and overall, you can rest assured that with a reputable OEM, this motorcycle was designed to be ridden and owned for a long time. If you go in there and start modifying stuff like brake lines, quick turn throttles, anything that affects the motorcycle's ability to stop and go, you're actually putting yourself at quite a bit of risk if you don't know what you're doing. As a fun anecdote as well, I remember way back in the day, I swapped out some brake pads on my motorcycle and I forgot to torque the bolts that hold the calipers down onto the forks, and I had a bit of vibration coming from the calipers. Now, that was certainly down to user error and not necessarily a modification, but if you go out there and maybe swap out your brake lines and forget to put enough slack, you could maybe pop the line. If you put a quick turn throttle on your machine and without actually setting it correctly, you could actually cause a situation where the motorcycle accelerates out of control. There's lots of instances where modifying your bike is not going to be as safe as just leaving it stock. And if you don't have a lot of mechanical aptitude, I'd highly recommend not messing with these systems. You can also get into a situation where you void manufacturer warranties or fail-safe systems by modifying your bike. And you can actually make your bike run a whole lot worse too. I'm imagining a case where someone puts on a bit of a cheaper exhaust on their machine. Maybe they put on an ECU flash that isn't quite right for what they're looking for. And then all of a sudden the motorcycle gets way worse fuel economy, performs way worse, and just sounds really loud for no reason. Truthfully, I think when it comes to exhaust specifically, because I know that's something that a lot of people want to modify, a slip-on exhaust is plenty to get you done and have some fun with your motorcycle. I think for the average street-going bike, a full exhaust system really is massive overkill unless you have a system that cannot be separated with a slip-on. Many pipes nowadays are a welded single piece with the catalytic converters, the headers, and the muffler all being welded together, so the only way to modify it is to get a full system. But I highly recommend getting something that's a little bit quieter, maybe has a baffle in it, and getting it properly flashed and tuned for that application. Messing with your exhaust, your ECU, your air and fuel systems is a quick way to make your motorcycle run poorly or have premature wear or even blow up. Another important point is the predictability of an OEM setup. If you've massively modified your motorcycle, if you go to try to get it fixed for some common issue, the mechanic's gonna have to think through all the other things you changed on your bike to see if they're affecting the system as a whole. If your motorcycle is largely OEM and stock, well then common issues can be easily diagnosed and solved. I'm thinking about the fact that I turbocharged a Hayabusa several years ago. It got to the point where I could only take that motorcycle to be worked on and tuned by a very specific mechanic. It's not a bike you could just take to any shop and have them take a look at it because it was so specific and modified. Now, that is an extreme example, and I genuinely think that turbocharging any motorcycle requires you to really know what you're doing and to not screw around, because you will find out if you do it incorrectly, because things like to go poof when you turbocharge them. Another common pitfall that can happen to beginner riders specifically when they're modifying their motorcycle is they haven't developed the mechanical aptitude to do certain modifications. What do I mean by that? I mean that if you've never changed the oil on any vehicle, maybe you should avoid making critical modifications to your bike just because it's pretty likely that you might break something. I'll give you guys a fun story. On our Discord server many years ago, one of our users on the Track Day channel swapped his master cylinder on his motorcycle to an RCS 19 system. It's a really nice braking setup, works really well. However, he misread the instructions and thought that one of the small bolts was meant to be torqued to 84 foot-pounds of torque. Well, it turns out it was 84 inch-pounds, not 84 foot-pounds. So without thinking much of it, he sent that little bolt to the moon and stripped it and broke it. Ouch. Now, beginner riders are apt to do these sort of mistakes, and so if you've never done anything too serious on a machine, maybe avoid doing some more serious modifications. For example, one of the most common ones can be swapping your chain and sprocket, but that can be really dangerous if you don't know how to properly rivet a motorcycle chain. Imagine your chain snaps off while you're mid-corner. That could easily lead to some instability and a crash on your bike. So beginner riders, when you're making these modifications, you gotta really think it through and see if you're up to the task. Now, we do have to talk about one of the most important things when it comes to modifying your bike, and that's the ROI. Here's where I'm really gonna sound like your concerned dad or uncle. It's the fact that you're never gonna get that money back that you pour into your motorcycle. Let's say you get a full system exhaust, an ECU flash, and all the bells and whistles for your bike. You spend thousands of dollars making your baby pristine. Guess what? When you go to sell it, it's still gonna be worth what the used bike would have been worth in the first place. So if you're okay with taking that money, throwing it down the drain so your bike can have some farkles on it, have at it. I'm not here to tell you how to live your life. We all know things are getting more and more expensive nowadays, and if you wanna take that money and blow it, that's ultimately up to you. Just know that you're never gonna get that money back, and so I personally think that you're better off taking those pennies, putting them in the piggy bank, and ultimately saving up to get the motorcycle you want. Because no matter how much you modify your bike, you're never gonna get the bike that you actually want. My Desert Sled is a perfect example. This motorcycle, brand new and stock, is kind of a do-anything motorcycle, right? I've spent the last 5 years training this thing to be a bit of an adventure bike, a bit of a touring bike, and you know what? It's still not as good as a bone stock middleweight adventure bike. So keep that in mind. When you modify your motorcycle to make it do the things you want it to do, it's never gonna do them quite as good as a thoroughbred machine. This goes for all you sport bike guys out there too. You can add as many go fast parts as you want on your SV650 or your Ninja 400, but guess what? A bone stock R6 is gonna perform better in virtually every single way because it was designed to do that by, wait for it, the engineers and designers who, as we said earlier, know better than you do. Guys, these are smart people. They work all day in and out, teams of the best and finest Japanese minds or German minds. You know, the Austrians make good stuff, putting themselves together to make the best bike for you to go buy on the showroom floor. So keep that in mind when you're modifying your bike. All that being said, to play devil's advocate a little bit, there's a lot of pride and joy that comes with modifying your motorcycle. Getting your machine dialed in just right to your personal tastes and preferences, there's really nothing quite like it. You guys know I've done so much to my Desert Sled. I have it literally dialed in exactly as I like. I got the comfort seat, the braking feel is perfect, the suspension's dialed in just right. All these tiny little tweaks to make it just perfect for me. That way when I swing a leg over it, it's like a well-worn pair of shoes. And your motorcycle, if you put enough miles on it, will start to feel like that. And keeping a bike completely bone stock, well, sometimes it can tend to feel a little bit like a rental bike or a demo bike. And when you show up to your local bike nights or your group rides, you want your bike to have a little bit something extra that kind of signifies that it's your machine. So I think that if you are considering modifying your motorcycle, those are great reasons to do it, but just keep in mind those costs and that learning curve. Let's talk a little bit about bike mods that actually make sense and are good for beginner riders to do to get their feet wet with the world of motorcycling. And then let's talk about some that don't really make sense.
What has 3 cylinders, an Öhlins rear shock, and enough torque to rotate the earth beneath you? Why, it's the MT-09 SP giveaway bike on YamiNoob.co, of course. We finally have one of these as a giveaway, and you're not going to want to miss it. Head over to the website and get 10x entries for every dollar you spend. We've got hats, t-shirts, keychains, but best of all, I recommend becoming a member to join our community and get automatic entries to win. You can stack them up and apply them to giveaways, and they never expire. We have some amazing bikes coming up that you're not going to want to miss. 3-day giveaways, top shelf leader bikes, and much more to round out this year. So head over to YamiNoob.co and get 10x entries to win the MT-09 SP giveaway.
Bang for buck for beginner riders out there, if you're gonna mod your bike, the first thing you gotta do is tires. Getting a good set of tires that are grippy, last a long time, and are higher quality than the OEM stuff that came on your brand new bike is without a doubt the first place I would put my dollars in terms of modifying your motorcycle. But you can treat it as a consumable, kind of how you do oil changes or gas. You're gonna have to swap out your tires eventually. You might as well get something that's super high quality and will work really well. The second one I'd recommend, and you're gonna lose a little bit of money on it when you sell the bike, but it will be worth it, is a slip-on exhaust. The vast majority of beginner bikes have all of their muffling done at the end pipe. So your Ninja 400s, ZX4RRs, all those sorts of entry-level machines have a lot of their muffling done at the very end of the pipe. What that means is that when you pop off one single bolt, slide the pipe off, and put the new one on, you're gonna get a big difference in sound that you'll really get to enjoy. The other good part about it too is beginner motorcycles aren't really tuned all that hopped up. They only make about 40-something horsepower. It's a relatively pedestrian motor, so you don't have to worry too much about the air-to-fuel ratios when you just slide a slip-on exhaust on your Ninja 400. Some bikes like the CF Moto 450 SS also really come alive when you put a pipe on them, and they have a great burble and sound from their 270-degree parallel twins. But truthfully, the first mods you should make on your bike are ergonomic and comfort mods. Your motorcycle is only good as you can control it, so you need to make sure the rear sets are dialed in, the levers are in the right position, the bars are tweaked in the right way, the seat is either comfortable or changed out to something you really prefer. Those sort of things are going to make a massive difference on your machine, and I really recommend doing those sorts of mods. So what's some stuff you should steer clear from? Well, I got opinions. In general, I really feel that a full system exhaust and a flashed ECU isn't really worth it on a street bike. Now, if you've got a track day special or a race machine, you absolutely should do that because you're gonna feel a massive difference when you're on track with a bike that has a full pipe, full song, and a flashed ECU. Huge difference. But for the vast majority of street riders, you really don't need to do that. I'd also steer clear from any modifications that make your motorcycle really different than its intended purpose. What do I mean by that? Well, let's say you have an MT-07 that you turned into a scrambler. You added long travel suspension, or you kind of did some knobby tires, or really changed the whole vibe of the motorcycle. You turned it from a naked sports bike into an adventure bike. You probably aren't going to be able to sell that bike very easily because it's been so heavily modified. So if you want to keep the bike forever, by all means do whatever you want to it. Just realize that after a certain point of modification, it's going to be harder and harder to sell the machine. Kind of like my desert sled here. I've done a lot of stuff to this bike, tubeless tire conversion, different bars, all this sort of things, and ultimately it became a motorcycle that's just a little too fine-tuned for the average rider to pick up and own. Of course, it should go without any explanation, but doing anything that massively changes the power output of your motorcycle is pretty ill-advised. Slapping on a supercharger, a turbo kit, super hot cams, or massively changing the engine, unless you have a track or race special, is not going to be a very good thing. You're going to limit the motorcycle's reliability, and whoever's going to buy that bike is probably going to think, yeah, I don't really want to mess with that. The last mod that I think doesn't really make a whole lot of sense is super upgraded suspension. Unless you're riding a bike that can't handle the weight of the rider, for example, a lot of rear shocks on machines aren't suited for riders that are too heavy or too lightweight, I really don't think it makes sense to drop $3,000 or $4,000 on full top-of-the-line suspension unless you're racing or tracking the machine seriously. You know, bigger adventure riders might have to swap out a rear shock to make sure that you actually have the travel sorted at the rear end of the motorcycle. Dirt bike guys are always highly tuned on the suspension settings as well because they have to handle so many bumps and undulations. For the vast majority of street riders, suspension is actually more of a technique issue rather than settings. if you're stabbing your brakes, you're never gonna have the front end settle correctly. If you're not trailing the bike into corners, it's never gonna feel like it's settling mid-corner either. You actually are able to ride a stock suspension motorcycle way harder and way better than you can imagine. And don't think that by magically getting a set of Öhlins on your bike, it's gonna handle fantastically as well too. Remember what we said, you're never gonna turn your Ninja 400 into an R6, and just because you put an Öhlin shock on the back of your SV650 does not make it an R1. So let's wrap up this video about motorcycle mod obsession. So folks, take it from me. I've been there, done that. I've done all kinds of modifications on bikes. I've turboed Hayabusas, I've swapped more exhaust than I care to even count, and I've done everything under the sun. And I'll tell you, most of the time, a stock motorcycle is more than good enough. I would say dial in a couple ergonomic things, maybe put on a little slip-on pipe and maybe do one farkle here and there, but realize that if you spend a bunch of money on your motorcycle, you're not gonna get it back. I really hate seeing those regretty spaghetti Facebook Marketplace listings where the guy's listing out this mile-long page of mods, hoping to get top dollar for his bike, and you just think to yourself, buddy, you're never gonna make that money back. So if you're okay with taking the money, having some fun and blowing it on your motorcycle, then by all means, do whatever you want. But I will say, taking that money and investing in yourself is always going to be the best choice. Get some advanced rider training, become a better rider, because as I mentioned, your motorcycle from the factory was designed by a highly specialized team of engineers and designers to make sure that it's going to work for you. If you're the best rider you can be and you can ride the bike very, very well, you can run circles around people who have modified their motorcycles heavily. So what do you guys think? Do you think beginner riders are a little too obsessed with motorcycle modifications? What's your go-to mod? Let me know in the comments down below if you got something that you get a brand new bike and you gotta dial it in. For me personally, it's tank grips. Small little tip for you from me to you right there at the end of this video. Thanks so much for checking out today's show. I truly do appreciate it. We'll catch you guys in the next one. See you later. All right, we're getting some feedback that our outros are a little weird. We had the Rossi amniotic fluid one, a couple oddball ones here and there where I pretend like you're dreaming, but I'm not actually pretending. You are dreaming. And you should probably wake up. Wake up! Kyle!
Wake up!
It's not real. But you know what is real? MTO9SP giveaway. YamiNoob.co. Click the link down below. You know what to do. It's the best way to support the show. But if you need time to think about it, watch this next video. If I can't convince you right here with this.